As we come to the concluding moments of this time apart, we ask the Lord to speak again to our hearts, to help us to see what He has for us in mind as we return to our normal life, carrying this moment of sacred meditation with us, that may impinge upon what we do and heal our thoughts and our actions for the best of our life. This is, as well as the concluding days of this week and month, it is also the conclusion of this liturgical year, for we are in the vigil of the last day of the liturgical year, and the Church invites us in her liturgy, both in the Liturgia Orarum and in the Missal, the readings, to reflect on this wider prospect, time and eternity, the Alpha and the Omega, and specifically on this day, the Last Judgment. It comes quite clearly in the Mass of this day. So we see with the eyes of St. John on the island of Patmos what is ahead. And in a sense, when we're on retreat, we're on our little Patmos, we are in the Spirit of the Lord, and we are away from noise and bustle. And the Lord, when He finds us available, is available unto us. So let's see what He says to our souls as we come now to the end of this sacred time apart. In the 20th chapter of the Apocalypse, we have this at verse 11. Then I saw a great white throne, and the one who was sitting on it. In His presence earth and sky vanished, leaving no trace. I saw the dead, great and small alike, standing in front of His throne, while the books lay open. And another book was opened, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged from what was written in the books, as their deeds deserved. We have here in the bottom of the page of this little Jerusalem Bible a note explaining what these books are. Here, a register of human deeds and a list of the predestined. Now, God sees all the future. He also sees the futurables, the futurible, the things which could happen if something else happened. And He sees, therefore, the tangents, because one thing will lead to another. Hence, all prophecy is conditional. And with regard also to world prophecies, things which regard the future of mankind as a whole, they're still conditional. And that's why we have, every time there's a warning from on high, also this insistence that we can avoid it or reduce it. Hence it is, they're given for a reason, and then we can avoid something of the consequences. But it also applies to the individual, the soul. We need to be warned. Take this path and this will be the result. And not only with regard to our soul, but with regard to our life. For we are our own worst enemy. We have, as the Apocalypse concludes, a further vision, because we have this terrible judgment, but then we have eventually the new heaven and the new earth, and the heavenly Jerusalem descending from God. And this Jerusalem, of course, is something that we belong to. I mentioned earlier how things still happen around the Holy Sepulchre. It's all concentrated there. Our redemption happened in that precious blood, which can still be seen, and it was brought to completion on the third day, where there's something of that happening every Easter with the miracle of the Hagios, the Holy Light, and therefore victory is ours. And our song is that of a perpetual Hallelujah. But, as in the history of Jerusalem, to this day, the Lord looks down, and as He did there coming down the Mount of Olives, where the present Dominus Flevit stands, built in the form of a tear, one celebrates there from faces the other way, one celebrates on the altar looking at what He looked at coming down that hill, that mount. And we can hear across the centuries Him saying, Yerushalayim, Yerushalayim, because that means vision of peace, Yahah Shalom. And he is saying, if you only had known what pertained to your peace, and that is unfortunately still the epicenter of what can really go wrong in the world to this day. So it applies also to the temple of our own soul, which is what I want to finish this evening. We are our own worst enemy. And therefore we need to be warned. We only have one journey on this track to the grave and to glory, or whatever, but we need to limit the damage of our state. What pertains to our peace? And also, because you did not know the hour of your visitation. Now, the hour of our visitation is manifold. It's right now, actually, where in a moment, a privileged moment, a kairos, an opportunity moment, where the Lord, where time and eternity are in intersection, where we're being encountered and ministered to by somebody who's in charge of time, who's giving us time on loan, but wants us to pause, put the brakes on and see what damage you're doing to yourself before you go back. So it's kind of important that we do, at the end of the retreat, pull the threads together and see what the Holy Spirit is putting on our hearts as concrete resolutions. I remember hearing that one time in my Carthusian years. The novice master was telling us, le démon n'a jamais peur de résolution générale. He's never afraid, the demon, of these general resolutions. Mais il a très peur des choses précises, concrètes. So that's the issue, concrete things, and then we're less in danger of eluding ourselves. Now, there's just one thing, because we can't have more than one message in a session, that I want to leave with us both. It's this, that the big issue is precisely what is contained in that word, Yerushalayim. The calm, the tranquility, the peace, the unruffledness of the soul that participates in the unruffledness and eternal calm of the Blessed Trinity. Now, we are in a noisy and an ever noisier world. Therefore, the damage is greater. Therefore, the armor has to be the more well cared for and the more strong. Let's look at a few concrete issues. For if we do not have peace, we will not be in a state of joy, and indeed, we will not be in a capacity really to heal. For people already are damaged, and they need this element of a deep calm when they come into the presence of someone that they come into for healing. Our mission is to be healers of souls. So let's ask for this healing in all that regards to our peace. For this, there are certain things which have worked and always will work, and they are contained in some of the great classics of our spirituality. It is said that the book that most influenced souls, after the Gospel, after the Scriptures themselves, is, at least in the second part of the Middle Ages, because probably the one that most influenced them in the West until then would have been St. Gregory the Great's Pastoral Rule, which was a manual for all those, and there were many thousands all over the Western world, who would be reading that and therefore reading that as a manual for how to be a good pastor. And it's still relevant because it contains pithy, valid, penetrating observations of human life, even on a psychological level. What works will work when it's based on unchanging truth. But the one after that, then, since it was written, we're not quite sure by who, but it's still ascribed to Thomas à Kempis, is The Imitation of Christ. Now others are read, but still this is a classic, and well read and well understood, still nourishes souls. Thérèse of Lisieux knew it nearly by heart, and she could pick it up, and we can still do that. Actually, I saw that happening years ago one time in a monastery in Scotland, a Benedictine monastery. The novice master would, on a daily basis, call the novitiate in, put them there after a prayer, and open this volume at random and give a word from what he picked up, as though from the Holy Spirit, and he was always bang on. Anyway, at this issue of what we do to ourselves by not knowing the secret of peace. Some there are who keep themselves in peace and have peace also with others. And there are some who neither have peace themselves nor leave others in peace. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? They are troublesome to others and still more troublesome to themselves. And there are those who keep themselves in peace and study to restore peace to others. Now, some of the elements of peace in the soul. Actually, even outside the Christian family, we can receive lights. We must not disrespect the ancient spiritualities of this planet, for they are here a long while. And we mustn't necessarily neglect the riches that are contained, for instance, in certain Buddhist and Hinduistic settings where, say what you like, they are calm and they know what makes for calm. And I noticed actually in Rome, living with all kinds of students, that in our house there in the Angelicum, the Convito, there was a proportion of them from India and these Asiatic blocks, and they all had one thing in common. In chapel, you'd see them like this, for long periods. The natural calm, which was part of their being. Now we are disfavoured in the West. You watch a Westerner at prayer, and proportionately there'll be more fidgeting and movement. We can't sit still. So, we're somehow contaminated. Oh yes, and with regard to what we can actually pick up from things that they've perceived, they do have gems of spirituality, even in China. There are little gems which are valid in every language, and we can pick them up, make a raccolto, florilegio, an anthology of them, mentally at least, and bring them up when they're useful. One time, when I was living in this house, Carmelite house there, when I was doing my studies in philosophy, I remember the rector, who was a very good man, he was also the university chaplain as well, a Carmelite, and he would come up with powerful short things in his homilies. One time, he came out with this. He read the 10 Commandments of a Buddhist monk. One was this. He would speak like this. Thou shalt not worry, for in so doing, thou shalt endure the same disaster twice over. So, thou shalt undergo the same disaster twice over, he said. And I thought to myself, worry is a self-defense mechanism given to us that we may avert disaster and prepare as best we can the coming moment in such a way that it is well lived. But if the present moment in which this is happening is so obscured by this worry thing, then it's losing the present moment. Therefore, in practice, the present is not being lived. It is being ruined. And if we are tendentially warriors, we are ruining our only present, which is time, which is life. And many go through life with this thing going on inside them. They're not living what is good, and it's there. And so, there are certain things that also in the element of worry we need to observe. We worry, why? Often for another reason. We will not accept that such and such happens. Now the reason is this, sometimes. We have, now going back to this Buddhistic backdrop, the great enemy of the soul in us, and they quite rightly see it to be desire. In other words, we will not have peace or joy or light or warmth until something is eliminated from the horizon and is not allowed to be. This must not be. I desire that it be not. So my joy, my peace is limited to something outside myself. I am beneath something which is material or historical. Therefore I am not sufficient to myself. Now the big thing is this: the soul has only one thing in its possession, in its control. It is itself. And therefore, we go through life, many of us, on the level of the planet, living outside our soul, adjusting all things possible outside our soul, but never really adjusting the one thing that we can adjust, and therefore, in the process, losing the one thing that we have a right to, in a sense. A certain amount of joy when we had the chance to have it. It's all virtual. And it's happening too in life in the way that we capture the moment when it's there. Look at a funeral, look at a wedding, look at an event in a family. Often what's happening is this: we're capturing what should be there. We're capturing life through a lens. The moment is not lived, it is recorded artificially, and it's all for the record. Life is not like that. Life is simpler when it's not necessarily recorded or performed. Life is in its fullness when it's tasted in relaxation and, yes, calm. Calm is a great ingredient for joy, for things are felt in their simple, passing beauty. Simplicity of the little thing, not complicated at all, often is a source of little joy, which is sufficient for the simple soul. We have too many needs, which brings me to the point. We create our suffering by creating needs. Even actually the Stoic philosophers and the Epicurean philosophers were close to fundamental psychological truth in some of their perceptions. Wrongly, Epicurus is abused as some kind of extreme hedonist. It's not quite like that. It seems that some of his lights were not far off, because he's saying something like this: it seems, if we eliminate need and desire, then we also eliminate pain. In other words, we can increase the relative pleasure and therefore joy by a non-demand on what is outside ourselves. Now that's profoundly true. The humble soul is the soul not in command. The poor soul is the soul empty and mendicant before the world. And something of that, even on the human level, we can take. Now add to that the ingredient, the supreme ingredient of divine grace, and we've got the formula. Because grace is light and healing and warmth and therefore joy. It's participation in divine life. And without that, there's no fundamental, on the level of the soul, joy. It's all a participation on it on the human level. But then, add this last ingredient and we've got it all. The soul that wills the will that wants things thus is in peace. When the soul weds the will that runs the cosmos, it accepts the event, and therefore it's free. Now that's extremely difficult, extremely important. We can't get peace until we've wedded the will of the Creator. And therefore, this element of la sainte indifférence, holy indifference, is fundamental to that joy over which we can somehow lay claim as Christians, trying to be in a state of grace. So to return and to recapitulate, much of our suffering is our own making, because we are not free, because we limit our joy to certain things happening or not happening. Another mode, fundamentally different, of going through the game of time is this: I am nothing. I receive. I own nothing. I am a steward of things on loan. Then, in some way, life is received as it comes, and we are free to fly.